Hello, wonderful internationals like me. Today in this video, I thought I will do a very different video, but I am gonna tell you the story of how I learned English language, okay? So I hope my intention with this video is to inspire you. It could be that you may find tips. It could be that some of the stuff I'm gonna tell you, you're gonna relate and you're gonna understand. So, and also I suppose that you may be curious to know. And so, yeah, I'm gonna go for it. Okay, so where do I start? Basically, when I was little, I learned French school. And when I started learning French, I thought, oh, this is very nice. This is really cool. So I really like French. And since I was little, there were 4 things that were like my favorite. It was like science, French, dancing, and like painting, like arty painting. Alicante, when you are a local, is very interesting how every year in summer or in the holidays, you see this influx of like blonde people coming into the place by all of these like blonde people. And I remember even being little and thinking, oh, who are these people? And like, where do they live? And why are they here? And do they all come from the same place? Or do they all come from different places but they are all blonde? Because I remember feeling super curious about it, okay? And in a very endearing way, like I felt curious about, I wanted to know about them, okay? And then also I never really felt patriotic about where I come from, you know? I do appreciate the town where I come from and I think it's a beautiful place. But whenever I heard some of the people that lived in my same town saying, oh, this is the best place ever, I'll be like, oh my God, you are so embarrassing. Like, I've always thought, I'm sure like the world is full of beautiful places, It'll be very silly of me to think that this town is the best, So there are good things everywhere. So that's a little bit of my mind setup that I have always had, okay? And additionally, I always really enjoyed learning and progressing. And when I was in school, very often I will wonder questions and the teacher will be in a different lesson. So let's say, for example, the teacher was talking about, I don't know, mathematics. And I'll be like, oh, what happens to that angle when this and that? And then he or she was like, yeah, we'll see this in lesson 7. And I remember going like, oh my God, that is so boring. Because I wanted to know it then and then. Because my question, my curiosity had appeared there and then. And I don't consider myself to be an extremely intelligent person. I don't consider myself to be particularly bright, but I have a very good quality, which is that I am extremely persistent and I become obsessed. Like if I want to do something, then I go at it until I get it. So it doesn't matter how many times I need to fall, I will get it, And yeah, I always say that whatever I do, whatever I achieve, anyone can. All you have to do is just like do it, because I haven't achieved things because I've been the brightest, the most intelligent. I'm just very persistent. I put a lot of work into anything I do. And then when I was 16, like I was like listening to like music in French and I will walk about like thinking, oh, how would you say that in French? And like practicing my pronunciation in front of the mirror. I was like properly obsessed with that. And as well with science as well. I used to love science, especially physics. And one summer I was like, I want to become fluent at French, and my parents had some French friends, a family. And so I went to France when I was 16 for a month. And that was the shock of my life, because I realized that everything I had studied was useful, but not really that much. It was like a slap in my face that I couldn't actually talk. All the stuff I've been practicing and all the songs, I thought I was like, you know, I was gonna walk in there fully fluent, and then that sounded really strange how they spoke, and I couldn't really talk, and I was like learning a lot. Obviously, after the 3 or 4 weeks, I became fluent, because it was like the, you know, it was like the final stage of years of learning, and it was like finishing off, you know, that part of me, of my knowledge, that then I have just finished in that month, okay? But also culturally, see, I made this idea of what France will be like in my head. I was thinking about the Tour Eiffel and this and that, and so when I got there, I got to this really boring little village where there was nothing to do but going and buying bread and like go to the park. And so France, like completely, like the standard of my ideal of France really dropped. I was like, yeah, well, this is not for me, and there's nothing to do with me. So that was me back then at languages. So French, and then disappointed, basically. So from 17, I was like disappointed in like languages. And then 90% of my friends from high school, whatever, they were all studying English. So I was like the black sheep of the group of everywhere I went, because everybody was knowing English pretty well, or at least they knew some words, and I knew zero. And on top of that, I chose science as a career, so I went in to do a biology degree, and a lot of the terms were in English, and I can tell you now, like, that a lot of them I didn't even have a clue what they were talking about, because they were in English and they were English terms that I couldn't understand. But, you know, I could live with that. And the teachers were always saying that, you know, you need English to be a scientist, you need English language. The work in Spain, you know, in Spain doesn't really invest so much in science, but there is plenty of work out there for a scientist. You know, there are loads of opportunities, because there are countries like the UK that do a lot of research and, you know, recruit and require scientists. And I was like, well, I'm not sure how I'm gonna do that, because I am actually like studying full on all day. In time, I was very conscious that I didn't know English. I felt super stuck, and then so I considered some tutoring, and I remember like paying for like a tutoring class or two, and prices were extortionate. And like, I remember the lesson, it was like, I do, I don't, and I was like, oh my god. Because I knew what it takes to become fluent at a language, because I became fluent at French. So I was like, I am like here with like 3 words for an hour that take me nowhere, and everything sounded to me like so alien. Because if French has the same roots as Spanish by being a Latin language, but English language is completely different. And I admit, sometimes I was like, I will never be able to learn this. Like, I don't think I'll be able to learn this. I remember it was a weight in my shoulders. I remember going to bed going, well, I'm preparing to be a scientist. I don't know any English, and I am not sure I'm gonna be able to learn this thing, and when and how. I need like money to be able to eat, and if I study English, like the whole thing was like a big mesh in my head. But, you know, because when I was in uni, I'll be talking to friends and say, oh, am I considered living abroad, blah, blah, blah. So people kept that in mind. And I just literally finished my degree. I had done my last exam. I had passed it like 3 weeks before then, I remember. And then I got this phone call from one of my colleagues from uni. And she's like, we taking a grant for marine biology. I was like lab biology. I was in marine biology. And she's like, we taking a grant for marine biology and we're off to Ireland. And there are four places and we 3. She's like, do you want to come? And I was like, I don't know any English. She was like, doesn't matter, you don't need it. And I was like, how am I gonna go to a place like knowing nothing? And then she was like, I was like, but don't you need it to work? She like, they pay you, it's a grant, they don't pay you much, but it's a little grant, and it's like for 3 months. Are you coming? And I was like, well, let me think about it. So anyway, long story short, I decided, I was like, well, I felt really vulnerable to be going to a place not knowing nothing about the language and being reliant on 3 people that I didn't know much. I mean, 2 of them I never seen before or I seen in the uni walking by. And this other friend, she wasn't really my friend. She was a colleague, but I never considered her a close friend of mine. So I was like, okay, but then for some reason, I actually don't even remember. I just said, yes, let's do it. So I completed the paperwork and off we went to Ireland. The grant, by the way, was to work in an oyster farm. So, you know, that was a very interesting grant from the university. But, you know, nevertheless, it gave me the opportunity, so I'm not complaining. But yeah, there were some Spanish people there already. And then they had this friend who was an English guy, a really kind English guy who lived in Ireland. And there were a lot of other really kind Irish people too. Went to the pub and he said to me the first night, he said, would you like a drink? I mean, I know that because I guess that's what he said. Because my response to him was like, I don't understand. And I remember as if it was yesterday, he went like that. Oh my God. Like, she doesn't know a word. She does not know. I just did not know a word. But anyway, so I was with my other colleagues. I didn't really need to speak much. But something that you can learn from, depending on which stage of the language you are, is that something I did different, I think, that from other people, is that instead of looking at my colleagues, I used to observe the locals. So my reference was them. And also, so see, if my colleague was trying to say, I like this ice cream, he couldn't really get the words out. So I didn't look at him, I looked at the people that was speaking the language. And also, because I was in such a situation that I was like so thrown into the deep end, in such a strange situation, picking up oysters and, you know, not understanding anything. Like the English language was like a noise and our little Spanish community where we'll interact with each other and that was it. I felt so vulnerable, so slavery and yeah, immigrant. Like it was unbelievable how much I felt that. That then whenever I heard something, like for example, one of the workers there will say, hi you, I'll be like, hi you. Like, so I will be like a little parrot imitating the things that they will say. And then what I realized is that my colleagues that had studied English for like 10 years or 8 years were like thinking, you don't say hi you say hello. Whereas I didn't question any of that. I was like a blank canvas. So what happened is that with my approach and nearly like a little kid, I was learning fast. Every day I had like a little word in my pocket. That's how I used to see it. And also I will see the language or the little words that I learned like a tool to communicate, but in a way I already could communicate without speaking, because you can do like signs, you know, you can like sort of work things out. And something that you probably will realize is that when you don't know the language or you are a foreign, the facial expressions, the body language, you are so much more sensitive to those. So I was also at that time. One of my breaking points for, actually I think is the very first time I spoke any English, was that my boss used to give me always a broken boot. Also, what will happen is that whenever we will go to the sea, when the tide was down, literally as soon as I put a foot in the water, I will get water up to my thigh, and I will have to be working all day, you know, in the winter with the freezing cold water, like with water in like on my leg. And that happened a couple of times, and I had my colleagues mediating, saying, oh look, her boot was broken, blah blah blah. But I think it was after the second time that happened that I said to my colleagues, I said, how do you say this? And how do you say boot, for example? I'm gonna say in Spanish, so I will say, ¿cómo se dice bota? Boot. ¿Cómo se dice roto? Broken. ¿Cómo se dice trabajar? Work. ¿Cómo se dice mañana? Tomorrow. And then I went straight to my boss, and I remember I said, boot broken, tomorrow broken, no work. No work. And because I felt furious, and I think that was the first time I spoke in English. Okay? So the need was that what, you know, opened up that, yes, requirement for me to communicate. And yes, and then I just, something that also I remember is that I thought, I don't know the future, and I don't know the past.